So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening for the Soane Foundation as we present tonight's talk by our dear friend and colleague, Tom Phifer. I'm Paul Whalen, Chairman of the Sir John Soane Museum Foundation, and on behalf of my fellow trustees, I want to thank Doug Wright, Chair of our Public Programs Committee, and our Executive Director, Bill Appleton, for helping put together this evening. Since 1977, Tom Phifer and Partners have received 4 Design Excellence Awards from the General Services Administration and more than 30 honor awards from the American Institute of Architects, as well as numerous national and international citations. He was honored by the New York chapter of the American Institute of Architects with the President's Medal, the President's Award, and by the Sir John Soane Museum Foundation, our little crew. He's also been awarded the National Design Award in Architecture Design from the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum and was elected as lifetime member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Mr. Phifer is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and serves on the boards of the Architectural League of New York and the New York Review of Architecture. I like to think that Tom is perhaps particularly proud of the fact that he was a former trustee of the Soane Foundation, and that he's still a good friend and supporter, but also that he is a centurion, a member of this hallowed association, as many of you are. Welcome to all of you. Following Tom's talk, we'll return to the podium to help with audience questions, and at the conclusion of the program, we invite you to join us for an informal reception. It says here in the adjacent room. I wonder if that means in the back of the room. The adjacent room. There's something incredible waiting for you all in there. So please welcome Tom.
Thank you, Paul. And I also want to thank the amazing Suzanne Stevens for organizing this. Amazing, amazing person. It is such an honor to be here, and what a nice crowd. I wanted to start with this image right here because obviously it's the Soane Foundation, but something amazing happened to me in 1976. You know, when I was in my home base of Genoa, we traveled up to London, and among other things, I went out to see the Dulwich Gallery. And I walked in there. It was kind of a February day. And for once, I think, in February, the sun came out. And I walked into this room. And this room was filled with light. It was like it embodied light. It was like being inside of one of Ronnie Horn's works, which I'll talk a little bit about. It seemed to have, light was just embedded in this place. And it had an amazing moment for me. And slowly over the years, this notion of light has washed over me very, very slowly. Very, very slowly. And certainly all comes back to this particular moment. And particularly on these projects that I'm going to show you tonight. Light has become the foundational material for me, all starting here. And so I start with Glenstone, and I start with this amazing picture of Mitch and Emily on the steps here. And their gift to me, and I'm just brimming with gratitude about letting me join their journey to make this institution. It was, the three of us were really just sitting around the table at the beginning in about 2009, 2010. And we began to not only conceive the building together, but they were conceiving the foundation and developing the collection. So for me, this was a remarkable journey until 2018 when we finally opened the building. It was a remarkable moment, and one of the pictures they showed me was the one on the right here. They wanted me to look at this. This is the experience that they had had over and over and over again, where they go to a museum and they look at works. They look at the art with 250 of their friends. you know? And they, in the very beginning, as they were starting to write the brief for the project, they said only 300 people should be in this building every day, so that you get to come into a room with maybe one work and have that moment there with that work, with the light and with that work. And so this was pretty foundational and important as an image for all of us to come together. And then we had this image pinned up for a long, long time. This is Ed Reinhardt, who, as you guys know, makes these black paintings. I tend to remember the ones that are about 3 feet square. And he has these big black crosses in the middle. Sometimes they're slightly different textures and tones. The paintbrush a little bit. And he wrote about the idea of slowing down, of getting lost in the work, of preparing for this immersive experience. And so we wanted to try to take this is why we had it pinned up for years. We wanted to try to take this slow experience and to develop that into an experience in the landscape and in the architecture, preparing you to see the art. And so when we first arrived at Glenstone, one of my fellow directors here, John Benner, took this picture and glued it all together on the computer. And then we went back and we just snapped this picture right here. We snapped this little moment within that landscape. And we began to talk about how framing the land heightens your experience with the land. And this was an important moment to begin to understand what this catalyst could be, to begin to slow down and use the land, use the landscape as this way to prepare. And so before we did much of anything, we didn't even start designing the building at this moment. We began to make, and we probably made 30 or 40 of these. We made these renderings that framed the land in all different ways. We framed the land, we framed the sky, and we began to take that one image from the previous slide that spoke about framing the land and having that immersive experience and having that be the catalyst as ways that we could understand to weave in the landscape and the light to this experience. And of course, one of the great houses of America, the Farnsworth House, Mies loved doing that with his 2 horizontal planes. He did it with so many projects, the Barcelona Pavilion and others. And he framed the land with these 2 horizontal planes, and he heightened that experience. And we used that to make this one room at Glenstone, which is this wood room with this beautiful Martin Puryear bench in it. And here you sit. It's a moment of pause and reflection, of calm, in between you moving around each one of the rooms. So this is a moment to take a breath and you frame the landscape that you've walked over previously. The other thing that Mitch and Emily talked about from the very beginning is to develop a series of rooms rather than making this one big flexible museum. To make a series of rooms, and it turned out to be 13 rooms after they begun to assign these rooms to different artists. We made 13 rooms, and 10 of those were meant to be in perpetuity, so that one artist would come, and usually one work, or there are several rooms where those works are interchanged, but still one artist. So with those 10 rooms, we began to work with the artist, with the proportion of that room, the materiality of that room, and the light that was there. And it began to take this and make it the house of rooms. And in the very beginning, we began to work not with this center pool. The center pool, if you've been to Glenstone, the center pool came much, much later. We, in the very beginning, began to work simply with the land that was on this special peninsula there. And we started just by making these kind of naive drawings that took, on the right-hand slide, took this kind of Renaissance cube, and we made an oculus in it to let daylight in it. And you can see with the one on the left, we were working with moving in and out of the earth. So from the very beginning, this notion of light and shade and shadow and deep shadow and moving embedded in the land rather than on the land, and letting that begin to be this immersive experience of going in and out of these rooms and back into the land. And so here's one of these early sections here where we took that peninsula and we began to make this journey around the peninsula, but you were in the land, and the courtyard was just more of the topography. So that these pavilions would sit and you would move under and on top of them and have this relationship to the landscape. So early on, we wanted to kind of deal with the land, to move into the land. This is one of our models that we worked with for years and years. We carved this and we continued to make this composition here. And this is a peninsula, which I'll show you in a second. It's a peninsula of land where someone had built a series of barns when we arrived. And, you know, just like in Switzerland, you want to build where other people had built. They had built here for a reason, and we didn't want to disturb the rest of this beautiful landscape. So we took this peninsula and we thought this is the place to build and to have our rooms begin to sit quietly in this land. And so you can see this is also a moment where we were beginning to look at the daylight. When we move from light to shade to shadow, we wanted every room to have daylight. And because we were on the cardinal points, we put this right on the north, south, east, west axis so that you feel the sun and the change of season and the passing time, the passage of time moving. That rhythm would begin to move into each one of the rooms. And you know, when I arrived in New York in, I don't know, 1980, 81, there was a renderer named Steve Oles who made these remarkable charcoal drawings, and that I always loved. And we began this journey. We probably made 50 or 60 of these too. And we learned, John Benner learned, how to make these on the computer. And so we made these kind of very soft drawings, trying to understand if you take these rooms with their own artists, these rooms have their own proportion, their own daylight, their own way of moving around them, which we talked about endlessly, about which artist should come before this one, what is this sequence of moving through. And then in order to honor them, to honor these rooms, I wanted to pull them apart so that you put then these rooms, these vitrines, softly in the land so that it would join this land and the art and the light and the architecture together. And let them be themselves and have their own moment with the land. It sort of looks like here that we organized this, call it this massing, this way of organizing these buildings together based on these drawings. But in fact, it was all about the experience as you move around in the passage. So I'll get to that in a second. Here's a little site plan of Glenstone. At the very top of the slide, you can see these three gardens, these parking gardens that you arrive to, and you come to that little white rectangle that's right there, and that's the reception hall. That's the visitor center. It has no art. And then from there, you get on a path and you walk through the land. And you walk through the land to this cluster, this village of buildings that sits on this peninsula. The bookstore is in this little visitor center. And we also pull the dining room. There's that little square, this white square that's down a bit lower. So we pull the food and the books and any distractions out of the program of these pavilions that nestle themselves into the peninsula there. And so here is an image of this kind of wood, these kind of timber arrivals building. It has a little bookstore. It frames the land. There's no art. You get oriented here. You get checked in. And then from there you walk. And you walk through the landscape. And this kind of rhythm of your body and the rhythms of your life are connected to the rhythms of nature and the movement of the sun and the sound of the wind. And so as you walk, it's about a 5 to 7 minute walk from the arrivals building up to the pavilions. And the hope is that as you walk, as your arms move, as your legs move, as your body moves, as you begin to put yourself in this landscape, that maybe the cares of the day begin to drop away and you prepare to see these works. That the landscape, this rhythm of the land and this movement begin to form this way of cleansing the experience before you move in. And so here are the two plans. On the left-hand side, you can see the plan of the upper level. You arrive in this arrivals building here that's on the top, and then you move down into the water court, and on the right-hand side, you can see the pavilions around this water garden. You go into each one of the pavilions and experience the works, and then you always come back to the pool with a bench. So there is that rhythm that you develop into a room, out of a room with a pause. And with that pause, you then get time and distance to move from that room to the next room, trying to take this notion of slowing the experience down, preparing this preparation for this next room as you move around the pool. And what better place to learn about what this pool ought to be than Rianji, this beautiful rock garden in Kyoto. They have removed the immediate horizon. And you have the light, and you have the sky, and the movement of the sun. And so here we took that notion of Rianji and we replaced it with this water garden that begins to unify this experience of moving around the court. And here is how these plants grow, which is kind of an amazing experience. We have these fins that you can see below the waterline, and each one of these fins contains a tray. And that tray contains a particular species of plant. And so you can remove these and move these around considering the season and considering where it's located in this water court. Some places in the court get more shade than others, and so our landscape architects, Pete Walker, has devised a way so that certain plants grow in certain places. And this is what you come back to. So these fins in the water begin to organize how this is grown. And so here is the arrivals building here that you come to after you've walked through the landscape. And so when you arrive, here's this remarkable work by Lawrence Weiner that is on the block. And here, this is as you arrive. And from here, you simply follow the daylight. You come to his work, you turned right, which is the image on the right, and you see the stair that takes you down to the rooms. And I think one of the interesting things for us as we began to study those early sections was to begin to deal with being above the earth or below the earth, that datum of the earth. And here we wanted to go down and occupy the earth. I've always loved Michael Heiser's double negative when he took his backhoe out into the desert and dug these two remarkable deep trenches there, and he went down and occupied the land. And here we wanted to go down in the earth and be a part of the earth as we began this experience of walking in and around this peninsula. You can see this wooden handrail that we carved here out of a big piece of ash wood, trying to awaken the senses with this sense of touch. And then in this passageway, in some cases, you get works. And here is Ronnie Horn's work. And I'm going to refer to her in a few times during this talk. It's been so important to me, this notion of Ronnie's work, when the light happens around it, that all of a sudden, these cylinders and these cubes that she makes, these platonic shapes, they hold the light. The light is embedded in them. It's contained in them. And that is just a wonderful, amazing phenomenological moment for me, and an amazing teachable moment. And so as we began to think about what this experience was in this passage, as you move around all the rooms, we didn't want it to be some arbitrary massing idea from the landscape. We wanted it to be all about light and shade and shadow and deep shadow. All of the lights are turned out here during the day, so that all you have is this way of moving from daylight, where you're right by the pool, then you go into light shade, then to shadow, and then into deep shadow, and then into a room that is completely lit. And so here is one example of that, where you're moving into this kind of cubic room, and you've come from the pool, and you move into this shadow, and you move through the thickness of this probably 8-foot, 9-foot thick wall, and you come into this room, and you're welcomed with light again. And then Bryce Martin's room is the one in the distance. And with that one, you go from light shadow into deep shadow. And then you come into lighter shadow, and then you turn left, and you're in this room, and you're in the daylight. And we wanted to try to craft this entire experience, moving these pavilions back and forth, so that it would be all about light and shade and shadow in the passage of time. You can imagine every one of these rooms and passages changes every day. As you're walking around twice a day, you can begin to feel the movement of the light every time. And what turned out to be shade on one side, all of a sudden that afternoon becomes daylit. And the whole expectation, movement of the sun with the shade and shadow begins to change. So this remarkable kind of sundial inside, I think was a remarkable discovery for us. And all about, of course, Khan is still present in my life, I feel. And he always said that shade and shadow belong to the light. They're not different from the light. They belong to the light. How simple is that? And so here is this cubic room that we began to work with a long time ago. This is this amazing pape. This is actually one of the 3 rooms that changes here. And so this room is about 22 feet high and wide and deep. And it has this concrete oculus that then goes up another 12 feet. So the light starts way up and has plenty of room to fall. That was one of the things I learned about Sir John Soane's work when we were working on the North Carolina Museum of Art. When you put the daylight way high and you let it fall a long way towards the works, it begins to soften against the wall and with the works. Just a note for the architects in the room, we're very lucky to have Altieri working on our mechanical here. That little 1-inch reveal at the top is the supply air, and the 1-inch reveal at the bottom is the return air. We wanted to remove all of the devices that we could get out of here. We actually started working with the local authorities about a month into the project, and we're trying to get just really limit the distractions here. And so here is this Lorna Simpson work that is also in that room, and you can see the kind of shade and shadow and the arrival experience there. And this room in the summertime gets incredibly bright, and then in the wintertime it dims. And this cubic room with this one work really resonates in this light. And here's Bryce Martin's room. We honor him tonight. What an honor it was to work with him. We work with him on the proportion of the room, the walls, and the amount of light, the kind of light, the movement of the light. This is a deep, deep clear story that goes up. So you can imagine being on the cardinal points. To the left is the north side. The right is the southern side. So you can imagine as the light begins to move around this clear story, the atmosphere of just this room completely changes. And you can see the entrance a little bit there to the right. You walk through this deep shade there, and then you come into the shadow, and then you're in the room. And then here is Carrie James Marshall in that one flexible room. That in this case, Emily had 4 pictures of his there. And then Cy Twombly, who I got to know a little bit while we were working on the project. We went down to his studio, and he, lo and behold, showed us what he wanted to put in the room, and we talked about the room. But then he proceeded to give us a long critique on the architecture. And he told me, as when we were being a little more sheepish about the architecture and the land, we were letting the land kind of govern. And he said, trust the architecture. And that, I thought about that the 10-hour drive home. That was pretty fundamental. And so here's Charlie Ray. Charlie Ray's room, he wanted this to be an open room so that for the next 10 years, he's going to curate this room with works from the collection. So he will move them around. He will curate this room. He worked on the proportion, the height of the room, the quality of light. And you can see that these 2 enormous doors back there that let this side light in. And that's where, it's the only way we can get his really heavy works in this room. we have this unusual floor. It's this material called toroxy. It's about 1/4 of an inch thick, and it's like very thin epoxy terrazzo. And it can take these weights like this without cracking at all. It's this remarkable material that has some flexibility to move. And so here's the Robert Gober room with this beautiful hand-painted mural. This is the one room that doesn't have light. He wanted this lit artificially. It's got running water, bars, newspapers that he made. It's a remarkable room. And what a great person he is, what a great artist he is. And then Michael Heiser, and his two works are outdoors. We worked with Michael on the proportion of the room, on the height of the wall, on where it was located within the sequence of rooms as you move through. And it's amazing to me that I still get nervous because my stamp is on the drawings, and you have people walking around this here without a handrail. I should beef up my insurance. And then here's Michael Heiser. You can see this over the rail as you approach the museum. And here Michael Heiser, I love this. He made 2 parallel plates that go down 12 feet into the land. And when you backfill those 2 plates, they're engaged at the ends. But the 2 plates then come together and just touch in the middle. One's a little bit higher than the other. It's a remarkable work. I watched him backfill this himself. And then here's a room that we just finished, that we worked on with Richard Serra. This room that is not in the cluster, not in the pavilion, but it's off. It takes about 10 minutes to walk to this room. We worked with Richard on the concrete. He didn't want any test pours to happen. He wanted the concrete to come out of the truck, and whatever it was, it was. Whatever came out of the truck for the floor is what it was. We worked on it with the light. This is really an outdoor room. And in these unusual weather conditions, this room could fill with fog. It's a really interesting thing, but working with him in this work called 4 Rounds was a remarkable experience. And so here is the Ankarara room. This room that's 45 feet tall, plus 12 feet. And what Ankarara wanted was this chapel-like space. So the light starts from way, way above and has a long time to fall. So it gently washes over these 3 date pictures that he has. This was the happiest moment in his life, him being an immigrant from Japan. These 3 dates mark the moon landing, and these are the biggest paintings that he made here. And so as the light moves, you can imagine coming here in the morning, and that western wall is just more intensely lit, very soft, but and then when the sun moves around to the west side, the eastern wall, and at noon, the wall that you're looking at straight ahead there in the middle, that wall becomes a little brighter. So you can really feel this movement of the sun in this room. And so for a long time, we were trying to find a material here for this. And we kept coming back to Carl Andre. We hung up Carl Andre images all over the office. And I love this one the best because this one, he takes this wood from the lumber yard, straight out of the lumber yard, and he cuts it precisely. And he places it precisely. And he takes something that is ordinary and makes it extraordinary. And so we thought immediately about concrete. And if we could find a mix without all of the additives that everyone puts in, without all of the additives, it could express the true nature of this material. We have 125,000 blocks. No, 25,000, sorry. 25,000 blocks. And they were poured in all seasons of the year. And so when we were starting to make our mock-ups, we started making these renderings because we learned that if you pour a block in the wintertime, it retains its moisture, and that block is darker. And if you pour a block in the summertime, that block is lighter. It hydrates quickly. And if you're lucky enough to strip a form after it rains, it permanently streaks. And so we began to think about this tapestry of concrete with it's kind of highway department concrete here that has that sense of permanence. And these blocks just stack with a 1/4 inch open joint. They're load bearing as tall as 60 feet on the building. And so here is this tapestry of blocks. And as the building has aged, this is a living material. The southern side has gotten lighter, and the northern side has stayed a little darker, that the moisture is being drawn out of the blocks, being hit by the exposures of the sun. So it is this remarkable kind of living material here. So just a few photographs. Here from the upper level. This is how far that pool is set down into the land here. And so now on to Warsaw. And here is another person I have to honor. You know, how I went over there that first time in 2015 and was greeted by Joanna, an American. I'd never been to Warsaw. She is the director of the museum, but she's also the director of the project, which means that she is also managing the construction and the design of the theater with the theater director. So she is the person that's putting this together, and she is a remarkable person with this political climate that exists there, building this building in this moment in their history. She is it. She has guided us, she's critiqued us, she's supported us. These two buildings are there because of her, so I honor her here. And so these first two images are Harry Cobb, my dear late friend. And Harry was on this fellowship from Harvard. And he was going through Europe. And he landed in Poland in 1947. And he canceled the rest of his trip. He was going to go to Scandinavia, Finland. And he canceled his trip and he stayed here to make these photographs. And while I was there at about 2018, Harry Cobb had a show at the big museum in Warsaw. And he had a show with these pictures, and there seemed to be hundreds of them. And the people of Warsaw, it packed every day. The people of Warsaw had never seen these ruins in color, that they didn't have Kodachrome film. And so Harry was there, gave an amazing talk about making these images and the history of Warsaw. And so here we are, where this place was simply leveled. The Russians and the Germans took turns. And finally, after the Germans left, the Russians came to occupy Poland, and Stalin, in 1955, finished this Palace of Culture as a gift to the Polish people. Some gift. And you can see at this moment the city is starting to rebuild. There's a public square that was built, this big square. There's a wide boulevard that was going to be built in front. And the subway is beginning to get built here. And then in the meantime, this is where the commercial has been built on the other side of the boulevard. In the 90s, 80s, 2000s, it's this commercial architecture that surrounds the Palace of Culture. And, in 2004 is when Poland joins the EU and becomes the economic engine of this country. You can see that this is the center with this soccer celebration coming here. This is the center of Warsaw. And so here's our site, very strictly guided by a master plan. There's the Palace of Culture with the two big parks that flank it. The theater is the square that's there that sits next to one of the wings of the palace. And then there is the rectangle there that is the museum. And so one of the first things we did is we began to see ourselves clearly between this glass architecture, this retail architecture, and this palace with its history. And we began to think about this kind of strong, heroic architecture that had a sense of permanence. And we wanted to find a way that each one of these institutions might express themselves differently. One is for the visual arts, one is for the performing arts. But these two abstractions that we made early on about what these buildings ought to be in this place and how strong the architecture needed to be between something that was there in 1955 and was a symbol there, kind of a symbol of oppression that they have taken over, to this commercial that was developed on the perimeter on this wide boulevard here. And so then, these are not works that one sees here in New York. These are works by Polish artists, and these are theater productions by Polish writers. So these buildings are the voice of these people, particularly during this time. They need this kind of discourse and dialogue, and these two institutions provide that. And with different administrations, these two institutions have come under a lot of fire. And so we were searching about how to express the architecture, the true ethos of each one of these two institutions. And we start here with Monika Sosnowska. One of my favorite artists, and she with this work took and built one of Oscar Hanson's pavilions in Lubin. And she took it, she measured it perfectly and built it out of this light steel, and then she crushed it. She wanted to expose the failure of his utopian vision of rebuilding after the war. And it's these two buildings have this kind of urgency of culture and dialogue that they bring with them. And that I didn't understand until I landed there. And thank goodness this design schedule was slow. So many people talked to me about what the ethos of these two buildings wanted to be, and it took a long time to understand. Yes, we're having turbulent times, but these times and how these artists work to express this voice was hugely important in the making of these works. And so here then, as we thought about the museum, here we go again with Ronnie Horn and making this museum a white vitrine that holds the light, that engages the light, that holds the light, that feels the movement of the light. I've just come back from a trip over in the wintertime. It's really dim there. And these galleries will really show that. They'll be dim on the top. And then in the summertime, the light comes up, and on the top floor, these 7.5 meter rooms will celebrate these works with light and with this kind of heroic scale here, all based on this kind of this occupied vitrine of light. And then the theater. And I saw so many performances as they'd take me every time I'd go over there. We'd go to a different performance with this theater. And everything was kind of dark in the room. And over time, that began to kind of wash over me a bit. And I began to think about a darker building so that you had the actors and the sets and the audience and the lights, that those would be present in the building. And somehow the architecture then would just drop away. And so we immediately began assembling these precedents, this deep space with Richard Serra, this piece of paper that is stapled to the wall, this space that that's infinite space, that is dark. So here we're trying to again explore light and shade and shadow and deep shadow. You need a bit of light to see that shade and shadow. And so here are these two buildings as they sit next to one another, the white concrete vitrine and the theater. They're on the right. In between this forum, this was a rendering made a long time ago, this forum now, this kind of living room for Warsaw. And so then we started to work on the theater here, one of the first buildings we started to work on. And this building sits right next to the palace. And we talked and talked and talked with the theater director and their folks. And we began to think about this big room, this big flexible room that's there, and then having enormous doors that would peel back. What the director wanted was, as the sets were being built, for people to be able to walk through this and watch the sets being built. And then there was a performance where they could open the doors, you could sit inside and you could sit outside or stand outside. That this was Warsaw's living room. And when the doors were closed, you could sit on the steps beyond and look through a window and watch. He wanted people to watch the makeup being applied to the actors. That this is a room that participates in the life of the city, in the pulse of the city, and is open, is accessible, and is welcoming. And of course, I love the moment where you think about this palace of culture with its history, this history of silencing people, and this big room here that's open and welcoming, and these two buildings in 2024 sitting next to one another and becoming this voice that's just open to everyone. And so here on the left-hand side, this is a performance that takes place. We have a big turntable in here, so the seating is extremely flexible. There's lighting, there's sets, but you can open the doors and have people gathering around outside. And then the one on the right is maybe a book fair happens here, that this becomes the living room of this place, that it belongs to this city and can become a room with civic activities that's open. It's open at one end to the main square. It's open at the other end to the park. And so I just can't resist in showing this because this was so important to us. This is Louise Nevelson. This is ordered shade and shadow and deep shadow. And it began to speak about these crevices that she has in here, the kind of depths of the darkness that she can find, and the mystery that this offers. And so then we began crafting our facade here with simply the windows that responded to what was going on inside. You can imagine a theater has rehearsal spaces, it's got office spaces, it's got makeup rooms, it's got little bedrooms for people to stay in. And so every one of these windows was choreographed to match that. And it made this pattern, and all the windows are set back by probably 3 meters, 3.5 meters. So they all are deep. And in the lobby, too, you can arrive in this kind of dark space, and you can arrive to an impromptu performance with this seating there. You can sit there and watch, sit there and have lunch, but sit there and have a moment in this darkened space with this impromptu or schedule moment. And then on the right-hand side, this is the black box. This big black box with a huge window that opens up to the park. And so there's the arcade on the ground. It opens into the lobby there. The scale of these openings are sometimes huge and other times fairly petite. This was my dinner partner a lot of evenings when I would go there. Joanna seemed to think I needed him. This is his installation in the Tate Turbine Hall, and it's called How It Is. And I always tried to go over there and make him laugh, but I never got a smile for 3 years. And so, I would show him what we're doing, and any time I would have anything that seemed extraneous, the least little thing, he told me over and over again, nothing delicate or in any way decorative. He wanted these buildings to be without ornament. And just dealing with this light and the shade and shadow and this sense of permanence here. But we would come over with these odd openings on the buildings, and he would really shake his head and have a tough time with us. That was really good. Here's this building as it sits next to the Order of the Palace. This is the calmest side, this rhythm. We are shipping these poured steel columns in these plates in from Gdansk. It's black steel that's coming with this weight. This is quite a big building. These columns will have that sense of permanence and weight. They're all welded together and sanded and in place. And so then, for the museum, we imagined again this house of rooms, because Joanna and her curators, they didn't want these big changing galleries where the collection would then, the room would change according to what the collection was. She wanted these fixed rooms, these rooms of particular sizes, so that the rooms would, in a sense, curate the art. That was something I wasn't familiar with. And so we began to think about this a little bit like Glenstone. Glenstone at this point was under construction. So we understood this notion of these rooms and how these rooms, their size and the particularities about it, you move from one to the next. And so we made so many of these that it'll make your head spin. Trying to understand the size and the scale of the rooms and the experience as you move from one room to the next room. She always began to define these 4 suites of rooms that she wanted on the +2 and +3 level. So it left the middle as an open space. And on the left there is the ground floor with this big arcade that comes in. You walk under this concrete apron and you're in this space, 6 meters tall, and there'll be a sound piece in there so that your journey from the city into the building with this full high glass, you will be in this enclosure with a continuous opening. And you will then come into the building. And here we have this thing at the bottom called the reaction gallery, where an artist is given a month to come and make a work of art that responds to that particular moment, that particular voice at that particular moment. And so hence that's the reaction gallery. We have an open auditorium that's open to the rest of the museum. Big sliding glass doors move apart. There's a big central stair, which I'll get to, a little education space, a bookstore, and a cafe with outdoor dining. So this ground floor is completely free. You can move freely back and forth. And in fact, they have huge sliding glass doors. The reaction gallery is the one on the left, and the cafe is the one on the right. And you can come and go in and out of this building so that this building is a part of the city, this kind of open and welcoming place. Here's a section. You can see these two Soviet-era subways that are down there, which I'll talk about in a second. The ground floor and then these two upper floors. One getting clear story light all the way around, and the other one at the very top getting this top light over every single gallery. And then this big oculus comes down into the auditorium that lets this light fall a long way, all the way down and land in that assembly space. And so as we were beginning to understand the structure, nobody knew what was down there. The subway was a mystery. And so in fact, the structural engineers and this archaeological team had to go out and make this study. And here's what they found. They wanted this structural grid. This was the only one that would work, that they could weave the subway into these columns. And it developed this beautiful rhythm. And so we thought that this archaeology, this kind of rhythm that's down there, that's in the earth, should come up and express itself all the way up and through the architecture. So that every gallery, every ceiling would have the expression of these beams as it rose up through the building, so that archaeology would rise. And then the main stair. This is the main stair right in the middle, this kind of double stair, up one side and down the other, up and down. And it's a social space. And I love Thelma Golden's quote here that I just read. Let the museum be a place to encounter art, but also a place to encounter each other. And so this space is that social space, this gathering space, this place where you see each other. And then from there, you move into the 4 suites of rooms. And so then on the second floor, you get these special rooms with windows. And here are these second floor galleries. These rooms are very simple. These happen to be this clear story light that comes in. This one happens to be on the west side. And this is perfectly oriented to the north-south, east-west axis. So in the morning, this light would come in, and this room on the western side would be a little dim. And then as the sun begins to move, all of a sudden it slowly brightens up. And again, feeling the movement of the light. And then a couple of the rooms, only 2, have these big windows that look out onto the boulevard and onto the city, so that you can constantly walk around in this experience and not be in a box, but have this relationship with this city that you know. And so on the left-hand side are these wooden rooms, these pause rooms, these rooms of reflection. They are in the middle of these suites of rooms, right in the middle. So after you've gone through 2 or 3 rooms, you come to a room like that. It has a library table in it. It has a little bit of art in it, not much. And it has a bench. And you sit on the bench, and it's a pause in preparation, learning those early lessons with Emily and Mitch about preparation. And then that's the library on the right-hand side, not particularly big, but it's where research is going to be done with a big window that looks out to the city. And then on the top floor, there's a terrace in the middle, and there are 2 big city rooms, these wood-lined rooms as well in the middle of these suites. you can see that all of these rooms were carefully proportioned with the curators and studied and modeled and the character of the light and the portals and those transitions from one room to the next are hugely critical to this experience as you move through. But the walls are thick. The walls are at least 1 meter thick, so you feel like you're going through this thickened, heavy architecture. And then here is this top floor that you saw before. When you arrive, it is all top lit. These rooms of art are top lit. The light is filtered. Of course, the art gets no direct light. It changes per season, per day, per time. You mark the passage of time with this. And these rooms, I didn't make this up. She wanted these rooms to have impromptu dances, impromptu performances up there. So that this museum is a place to celebrate. And so just to close here, just a few model shots that we clipped here. The arcade at the bottom, big terrace at the top, and these windows with this white concrete. Very simple. And there's one of the big models that we built for Glenstone over there. And this tower right here is actually the cinema that is down below. You enter this tower that's about 80 feet tall, and you go down. And then there is the theater sitting beside it in these early models. The big room with the doors closed, these glass doors closed, that black box theater there to the left-hand side of the theater, city rooms there to the left, and then this side that opens to the square. And then just some construction pictures. This was taken a pretty long time ago, but I love it. This is actually one of the windows in one of the city rooms, clad in wood, but you can see the size and scale of this window as it opens itself up to the city. And then this remarkable concrete that they're pouring. And there's a little bit of the structure there that you can see. These big heavy beams are on that grid of this excavation as it begins to rise up. And these big heavy piers that are here that hold this are really large, and they are on that as well. And here's this building under construction. And so these three people on the left, I got to tell this story just before I get off the stage here. You know, as they started to pour this remarkable concrete, it was something to behold. And I walked into this tent that was on the side, this big tent. I'd go there every time I was there, and I was there pretty often. I'd go in there, and for a long time I'd watch them building these forms. And there were folks that were as old as me. And they were in there with these beards, and they were cabinet makers, and they were making these forms. And you'd go up on the scaffolding, and you watch the way they'd bend the bars, and you'd watch the way they'd vibrate the concrete. And then there's Rafa. He's the one on the right there. He's in charge of this remarkable concrete. And he tapped me on the shoulder one day when he was walking around with me. And he said, you know, we're really proud of this building. This building is a matter of pride for this city. And everyone that's here is working on this as a matter of pride. And I think he used the word voice, that this building has something to say. And we want to be a part of it. And that is craft, this kind of heart and soul craftsmanship. And then, of course, I couldn't part without showing our office here, our dedicated crew there down on Varick Street. So I honor them. I wouldn't be standing here without them. They're a remarkable bunch. Thank you. Want me to stay here?
I think we have a couple of minutes for a couple of questions, and then let's go to the other room, and you can have a drink while you ask Tom questions. Suzanne.
I just have a very realistic question. The Museum of the Art Museum is opening this summer, this fall?
No, it's actually opening in October.
October, okay.
October is the first opening. They're trying to decide right now whether they can acclimate the building in time to put art in it. But the mayor has said it is opening on October 23rd, and I think it will open on October 23rd.
The theater is 2 years away.
The theater is another 2 years away. We had a land issue there. You know, after the war, there was one piece of property that hit the footprint of the theater. I'm sure a lot of cities went through this. It was about the size of this room. For 4 years, they were in court trying to get that piece of land back so they could build the theater. They finally got it back. And so now we're going to be under construction and raring to go.
Your renderings are amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, hi there.
Yes, I was wondering, are some of these spaces, is there artificial light in some of them, or are some of them just totally?
Well, I would certainly prefer that museums close when it gets dark, but somehow I haven't been able to convince a director to do that. But we, of course, have light in all of these. In Warsaw, we have those coffers. Did you see the coffers up there? We have a light track. It's lit with amazing light at night that will match the quantity and the quality of the light during the daytime. And of course, all of the light in both of these museums, I didn't touch on this very much, but you know, we work with OVA Arab and they make these computer models simulating every single moment of every day of every year to make sure that the lighting budget for the year is not violated so that the art is not damaged. So every time you see daylight coming into these rooms, it's all been calibrated and tuned so that it doesn't damage the art. And it's the same because, you know, light, artificial light, also is the same. So we have found a way to weave that all together to make lighting for the museum. I certainly love to go there and turn all the lights out.
Are there periods in the day when you can do that, or?
Oh, yeah. You know, at Glenstone, they have absolutely followed that. It takes a really cloudy day for them to turn the lights on. I hope. I'm not down there every day, but every day I'm down there, they've turned it off. And that's the way we designed it. And in Warsaw, I hope they do that too. In the summertime, it's going to be completely possible. In the wintertime, it's like, I'm sure a lot of you have been to Berlin. I mean, it barely sees the sun. I was over there some weeks this winter, and it's fog and it's dark all day long. So, you know, the artificial lights will be running during the winter a bit.
You have time for one more?
Hi there.
Anybody?
Could you say the theater was black?
Ye-
The building is black?
Yes.
Because it looked very kind of almost sepia in the photos.
Well, you know, that's interesting. I've been trying to find what black that should be. And I've been looking at Mies, of course. And I've been learning all about what color he painted his buildings. The gallery in Berlin. I looked at this purpley black color in Houston on the Museum of Fine Arts there. A lot of his buildings are dark, and so we've been comparing the paint colors to his paint colors, hoping to get some magic there. You know, and so yeah, there are lots and lots of and then of course there is black, which is the absence of color. So we're certainly investigating that too. That's a good question.
Why don't you all, actually, Bill, do you have a message from our sponsor?
I'm going to actually say
Thank you, Tom.
something. Good evening. I am Bill Appleton, and it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you here on behalf of the Soane Foundation. And rather than trap Tom in the room, I really do encourage you to go through the doors at the back, and why don't we meet all and have a very personal time over a drink. Our next program will be on March 21st. Keep an eye out. If you didn't get the newsletter for this, reach out to us through our website, and we'll be happy to send that It's going to be on the Mount and Edith Wharton's time there with Thomas Jane and Mitch Owens. So please join us for that on March 21. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much to our wonderful friend, Tom Phifer. And please do go right on through and we'll meet you in there.